Hey guys, so today we are talking about our 4-day Yellowstone itinerary. We are looking at the map that's provided by the National Park Service. So first things first, we want to go ahead and break it up into 4 different sections. So each section you do on a different day. Obviously, depending on your schedule, where you're entering the park, where you're exiting, you can determine what days you want to do these different sections on. But we'll go ahead and separate it into the 4 different sections. So first off, we have the Old Faithful area. The second section we have is the West Thumb, Grant Village, Fishing Bridge area. Next we have Canyon Village. And last but not least, all the way on the Montana border, we have Mammoth Hot Springs. So these are your 4 different sections. We will break it up and dive a little bit deeper into each of the sections to show you what you should do on each day when you're visiting Yellowstone National Park. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first section we're going to be looking at is the Old Faithful section. I'm starting with this one mostly because I feel like a lot of people enter Yellowstone from the south entrance because they're coming from Grand Tetons, which is what I did. Might not be the case, but you can do this on a different day. We're going to go ahead and start this off and call this day 1. So here you can see is the south entrance. This is where you'd be entering from Grand Teton National Park into Yellowstone. Shortly after you get into the south entrance, it's not marked here on the map, but somewhere about here I'd say, is a small waterfall called Moose Falls. You'll see a sign for it as you're crossing over a bridge. You can just pull over, walk about 1 or 2 minutes and you'll see a small waterfall. Just something to get out, stretch your legs, see something beautiful right when you enter the park. Keep driving up the one main road, makes it a little bit easier. Then you see here on the map is Lewis Falls. So again, it's the same thing. You'll see a small sign for it. You can pull over, get a nice quick look at some nice waterfalls. You can continue along the main road here and keep going, and you will see the Kepler Cascades here, which is another nice waterfall. You'll have a observation deck platform that you can look down upon the whole river and the waterfalls. It's quite a nice view, especially Lewis Falls and Moose Falls are a little bit smaller, and this one's quite a bit bigger than that, but they're all 3 very nice views. So we're going to keep going on the main road. You're almost to Old Faithful. So here we are. We arrive at Old Faithful. You can go to the visitor center. You can grab a bite to eat, but make sure you want to check when the next time the Old Faithful geyser is going to erupt, because if it's shortly, then obviously you want to go ahead and grab a seat or grab a good spot to see that erupt. If it's not for another hour or so, then you have some time. You can walk around the upper and lower geyser basins, which are attached here. They're not labeled on the map, but as soon as you see Old Faithful Lodge and the Old Faithful Geyser itself, you'll see boardwalks all around it. You can go ahead and just start walking around. Once you've done the upper and lower geyser basins and you've seen Old Faithful erupt, you can get back into your car and drive about 5 minutes up the road to Black Sand Basin. Again, it's another one of those that's obviously filled with geysers. Some people might think it's the same thing as upper and lower geyser basin, but it's always nice to see, as many geysers as you can because they're all different, and that's kind of why you came to Yellowstone. Go up 5 more minutes down the road after you're done with Black Sand, and you'll see Biscuit Basin here. Biscuit Basin, not as big as all the upper and lower, but the great thing about Biscuit Basin is there is a trailhead here for Mystic Falls waterfall. So it's a pretty easy hike, only 2.4 miles total, there and back, not a loop. But it's really gorgeous. It's a very flat trail, nice scenery, and when you get there, you'll see quite a big waterfall, so I think it's definitely worth it. Give yourself maybe an hour or so just to walk through the basin, go through the Mystic Falls, and then when you're finished with that, you can make your way up the road a little bit further here to the Midway Geyser Basin. So this is probably the second most famous in the park after Old Faithful area because it has the Grand Prismatic Spring. So actually at this geyser basin, there's only 3 geysers, but they're all quite large. So there was the Excelsior, which I actually thought was pretty cool because it was like a crater. and then the Grand Prismatic. So when you're walking along the Grand Prismatic, you actually can't see it too well just because it's so large and so flat and even with the way that you're looking at it. So what I suggest obviously is get out, walk around, see it, as you should, but then you'll go back a little bit and you'll see down the road there's a trailhead for this Fairy Falls hike. You're not going to actually do the Fairy Falls hike, but it stems off of the Fairy Falls hike. So you'll start at the trailhead and there's no signage or anything, but it's pretty easy. Pretty much everyone who's at that parking lot is going to be doing the Grand Prismatic Overlook Trail. It's only a mile up and a mile back down, so it's pretty flat until the very end when it gets a little bit steep just to get to the overlook. But overall, I'd say it's still a pretty easy hike, and it's the best way to see Grand Prismatic. Just because you can actually see all of the colors, you can see how big it is, just obviously because you're looking at it from above. So it's definitely the best way to see it, in my opinion. And after that, you'll probably be pretty tired because you've been walking around a lot of geysers and seeing, a couple waterfalls and doing a couple hikes. So total, this would be the Old Faithful area that I'm talking about, and that would be day 1. You can go back to your accommodations, whether that's in Old Faithful or another area, and get ready for the next day. All right, so next up on our 4-day Yellowstone itinerary, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Grant Village, West Thumb, Fishing Bridge, this kind of area over here. So first things first, what we're going to look at is coming in from Old Faithful, you're going to hit the West Thumb Geyser Basin. So this is a really nice geyser basin. I know you saw a lot yesterday on the first day around Old Faithful and Midway Geyser Basin, but this one's a little bit different just because, it's right on Yellowstone Lake. So as you're walking through the geyser basin, eventually it will lead you to the shores of the Yellowstone Lake. So it's quite a beautiful walk. After you have finished your West Thumb Geyser Basin walk, you can drive along the road here until you get to the Natural Bridge hike. So if you're not much of a hiker, obviously you can go ahead and skip this. It's not too difficult of a hike. It's 2.5 miles there and back. It's easy. But basically it just leads to a rock formation that looks like a bridge, so they call it the Natural Bridge. So if you're a hiker, if that's something that you're interested in, it's a great stop to do when you're in the area. If not, you can keep moving on and you can head up the road here to the Mud Volcano area. So this is a nice area, again, filled with lots of geysers, but it does have a famous geyser called the Dragon's Mouth. So it's basically like a cave and there is smoke coming out of the cave and making noises. So it's definitely a pretty popular one. It's a good one to get a video of. Once you've finished walking around the Mud Volcano, right along this same road, it's not listed here on the map, but there is a small pullover called the Sulphur Cauldron. So there's just two or three small pools that you can overlook. It's called Sulphur Cauldron for a reason, so definitely be very stinky. But it's a cool sight to see. You just see the mud bubbling up, and obviously the smell of sulfur is overwhelming. So it's a little bit interesting, different than what you've been seeing. So then you can continue on here. You can see this whole area is Hayden Valley. So there's not really a place exactly to stop in Hayden Valley, but just driving through, you'll see lots of different pull-out points, and this is a main place that people come to watch some wildlife. So you can see anything here, ranging from bears to bison, pronghorn. There's even rumored to be a wolf den here. However, you do need a telescope or some really, really good binoculars in order to see the wolf den. We did hear some people talking about how they were able to spot the wolf den, and the pack of wolves actually was coming out of it, and they were able to see some babies and whatnot. So we tried to find it, but our equipment wasn't as good. But if you do ask a park ranger, they can let you know where it is and where you can set up your telescope so you can see that. So it's pretty cool. Other than that, you just got to drive around and just hope for luck, hope that you see something. Sometimes you got to pull over and just wait for a little bit, be patient. But it's definitely a really good place to, see some wildlife, especially I know a lot of us do come to Yellowstone to see a bear or some other beautiful creatures. So it's a great spot for that. When you're down here, you can head up to the Canyon Village area if you want to grab a bite to eat, go souvenir shopping, anything like that. There's also a visitor center here, some restrooms. So if you just need to, kind of take a break from all the sightseeing and whatnot, it's a great little area where it's not as packed with people as Old Faithful, but it still has a lot of the amenities that you would want in a good restaurant. So you can do that. And then you can come back down through Hidden Valley because, again, you never know when you're going to see something. So even if you might have, spent some time there, now all of a sudden there could be a group of animals that have come after you've decided to eat your meal. So go ahead and drive back through. Then you can come on this side near Fishing Bridge. As you're coming through, this is only if you enjoy hiking, but otherwise you can just take this road as just a view and just enjoy the views of Yellowstone Lake. But there's a pretty popular hike right here called Avalanche Peak. It is 4.7 miles total. It gives you great views of the mountains and the surrounding areas. A lot of people do claim to see lots of wildlife on the hike too, because it's not as populated of a trail because it is a little bit longer and a little bit more difficult. But, have your bear spray, be ready to see some animals, see some great views. If you like to hike, this is definitely a good one that a lot of people recommend to do, especially if you're in this area. If you don't like to hike, that's totally fine. I say still just do the little drive around Yellowstone Lake. Might as well see as much of the park as you can. And then you can go ahead and make your way back at the end of the day to your accommodations, whether that's in Old Faithful or wherever that may be. So that is the West Thumb Fishing Bridge kind of canyon area. And we'll go ahead and move on to day 3. All right, so now we are moving on to the 3rd day on our 4-day Yellowstone itinerary. So on this day, we're going to be looking at the Canyon Village and Norris area. So if you're coming from your accommodations in Old Faithful or even West Yellowstone or wherever you may be staying, you'll take the main road up and you can do your first stop here at Gibbon Falls. It's one of those where you just see the sign, you pull over on the side of the road, and you can see the nice waterfall. Move on a little bit further, there are the artist paint ponds. They're not as exciting or well known, but it's definitely something that you can get out and see if you feel like stretching your legs again. But pretty much we're trying to make our way up here to the Norris Geyser Basin. Another geyser basin, but something interesting about this one is it is the hottest, oldest, and most dynamic of Yellowstone's thermal areas. So the highest temperature recorded in the entire park is actually here at 459 degrees Fahrenheit, only 1,000 feet below the surface. So it's definitely pretty hot over there. You can smell the sulfur, but it's, again, each geyser basin is different. So even though you might feel like you've seen a lot of geyser basins, this one's definitely one of my favorite ones. It's very large. You can take your time walking around and seeing all the unique features that it has to offer. As you make your way across this main road, we will be going to this area. And so you can't really see it on the map because it's not labeled, but this would be the area called like the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. So here we have the upper and lower falls. Typically you can do the brink of the lower falls trail, which you would hike from the parking lot down to, the brink of the lower falls. However, for the rest of 2020, that is closed due to damage. Same thing with Uncle Tom's Trail. It's another trail that leads from the parking lot down to get a good view of the waterfalls. But that one's also closed for the rest of 2020 due to damage. But you can still drive along the North Rim Trail and the South Rim Trail. And there are lots of different points to see. You can stop at Inspiration Point. You get a different view of the canyon and the river. And one of the most famous points in the whole park, which is Artist Point. So Artist Point is very beautiful. You don't have to walk very far from the parking lot over to the platform to view, but you get a whole 360 view of the canyon, the river going through, and the lower falls at the end. So it's a very nice picture. If you have a good camera, definitely bring it for this viewpoint because you will want it. Then, depending on, what your schedule's like, you can, again, just like you did the day before, you can stop in Canyon Village, get something to eat, go to the restroom, get some souvenirs, whatever you need, but just know that there are some amenities here for you. If you like to hike, I would highly recommend doing the Mount Washburn Trail. This is one of the most popular trails in the park for people who like to hike. It is 7 miles round trip, so again, if you're not too much into hiking, I wouldn't recommend it, but if it's something that you really enjoy doing, it offers great views of the surrounding areas and lots of sightings for nature. So you can go ahead and do that hike if you feel like you can squeeze it in that day, if you feel like you're good enough, you do hikes very often that you can do that. So otherwise, that's pretty much it for the day. I highly recommend driving through Hayden Valley once again. I know you did that the day before, but again, every day, every hour, every minute is super different. So if you didn't see anything yesterday, you might be able to see something today. For example, when I did Hayden Valley on my first day. We didn't really see much. We just saw some bison, a pronghorn. That's kind of it. The second day that we went to Hayden Valley, we actually got the best sighting of a grizzly we had seen the whole time in the park. So we saw a bunch of cars. We were able to pull over, and there was a grizzly maybe 30 yards up on the hill. So we didn't need our binoculars to see at all. We can perfectly see the grizzly's face, just watch it walking around grazing. And it was there for about 40 minutes. So it was definitely the best wildlife viewing we'd seen, especially of a grizzly. So you never know. You might want to keep checking back as often as you possibly can. And then you can go ahead and make your way back to your accommodations in Old Faithful to end your day. And last but not least, our last day for our 4-day Yellowstone itinerary is all the way up here in the top in the Mammoth area. So this is bordering Montana. So it doesn't look too far from the Old Faithful area, but I will tell you, with the one-way roads, the possible animal crossings, the slow speed limit, it does take about, I would say, an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half to get from Old Faithful to Mammoth area. So just keep that in mind. It is kind of a long drive, but definitely worth it because you still want to see some of the unique hot springs and geysers up here. So go ahead and we make this long drive all the way up to the Mammoth area, and we will stop first at the most popular site for this area is the Mammoth Hot Springs. So the one thing that's a little bit different from this area compared to the other geyser basins that you've been going to is just some of the unique shapes and tiers of some of them. They have water in them that cause a reflection, and just looks like waterfalls sometimes flowing down from one of the rocks to the other. So it's definitely one of the more unique hot springs in the area, so it's worth checking that out. You can park at the bottom where the Mammoth City is, and then you can walk along the boardwalk all the way up. I think that's a little bit easier than parking at the top, making your way back down, and then having to walk all the way back up the boardwalk, because you don't really need to go all the way to the top. So you're basically just doing that long walk just to get back to your car. So it's easier to park at the bottom if you can find a spot and kind of do the boardwalk around there. After you've walked around the hot springs, there is the Beaver Ponds Trail, which is right at the bottom of where you would park next to the Mammoth Hot Springs. If you like to hike, it's 6 miles total. It is moderate to strenuous, but the views are supposedly really great. So again, if you're not too much of a hiker, go ahead and skip it. But if that's something that you're interested in, it's right near the hot springs where you'd park your car. So you could leave your car parked, finish the Mammoth Hot Springs, and go ahead and just hop on the Beaver Ponds Trail right away. In the Mammoth area, there are lots of different amenities. There's a visitor center, there's gas, a restaurant, and you'll see a bunch of elk grazing around the city. They get very close to the humans, so make sure you're not going into their space and just let them, even though they seem very close to you, let them, mind their business. But you'll get some very good shots of some elk if you have a good camera, even your iPhone. From here, you can go up to the Boiling River Hot Springs. So because of the whole COVID situation right now, they're not letting anyone in the water, but they didn't say they weren't quite sure if they were going to be closing it off for the rest of 2020 or not. So you can go ahead and ask a park ranger at the visitor center while you're there if it is open now. Also really close to Mammoth is the Osprey Falls. So it's a very large waterfall, but you do have to hike to it. It's not labeled here on the map, but it is somewhere in this area. It's quite a long hike. It's 8.3 miles, but our tour guide that we had in the Grand Tetons, he's been working in the Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone for a couple years now, and he says it's his favorite waterfall in the park. So we didn't have a chance to go, but if you like to hike and you want to see a waterfall, it is highly recommended by someone who's been in the park for a while. So do it when you're up in this area. Next is Wraith Falls. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's only a mile, half a mile there, half a mile back, just to see a quick waterfall. You can pull over on the side of the road. You'll see a bunch of people doing it. It's quite popular to go ahead and do that. From here, you will continue along the main road, and you can go to the Tower Roosevelt area. This is another area that has, some amenities for you. They have a lodge, they have a restaurant, they have restrooms. So if you need something else before you head into Lamar Valley, which is this area. So a lot of times people feel like Lamar Valley is quite out of the way and they can't get to it. But I think that if you're doing Mammoth up there, you might as well throw Lamar Valley in there too, because you're already up in that area. Lamar Valley is pretty similar to Hayden Valley in the sense that you're just driving and kind of hoping that you see wildlife. So we met a bunch of people when we would pull over on these roads, and they would just set up their telescope and just stay there for hours and just hope to see some things. The only difference between Lamar Valley and Hayden Valley, I will say, is that I felt like the road was a lot farther from where you would see the wildlife in Lamar Valley. So my small binoculars weren't too great for that, whereas Hayden Valley, I felt like I could see stuff a lot closer. But if you do have some good equipment, we did meet a couple people who got there early in the morning. They saw a wolf pack walking along the river. We met a couple people who had seen some grizzlies up on the hill with their telescopes. So it's definitely possible to see a lot of things. You just want to bring some good equipment and just have some patience. Make sure that you're not in a hurry, just driving up and down, and if you don't see anything, you leave. You gotta pull over, take some time to wait and just see if you can see anything, and talk to the people who are at the pullouts because they give you some really good information. A lot of those people are either local or they come here a lot and they know what they're doing. So it's always good to talk to those people. As you're coming down back to your accommodations, normally I would say take this road home so you can hit the Tower Falls and just get a different perspective on your way home, drive through a different road and go through. However, for the rest of 2020, this road is actually closed, so you cannot access Tower Falls and you can't access this road at all. From Canyon to Tower Roosevelt, this entire road is closed. So, again, talk to a park ranger on when it will be opening up in 2021 so you can go ahead and see the Tower Falls because they're supposed to be quite beautiful. But for now, since the road is closed, once you're done with Lamar Valley, just remember that because this road is closed, now you have to drive all the way back here, all the way back down to Old Faithful. So I'm pretty sure it took us about 2.5 hours, something like that, or a little over 2 hours to drive from Lamar Valley back to Old Faithful. So just remember that when, you're in the valley and it's starting to get dark or whatnot, you still have a long drive back. So you want to make sure that you get there without any complications. So that one, you don't have too much to do in that day, but it's a lot of driving because it's a long distance away. If you are going to exit the park after your last day through the north entrance, it would make the most sense to stay up in Mammoth. If you're going to exit through West Yellowstone, then it's perfectly fine to come back down to Old Faithful, and then you can exit from there. So there you have it. We have done Yellowstone in 4 days. So just a quick little recap. We have the Old Faithful area that we focused on. We have the West Thumb, Lake Village area. We have Norris and Canyon Village. And then all the way up by Montana, we have Mammoth, and we'll go ahead and include Lamar Valley in there since we talked about it. But yeah, so, there is so much to do in Yellowstone, so much to see. It's going to be impossible to see everything in the whole park unless you're able to stay for a couple weeks. But it's really important just to figure out what your intention is for the trip or what's the most important to you. So you can focus on just driving around and trying to spot wildlife if that's something that you're interested in. You can focus on trying to do all of the hikes or seeing all the waterfalls or just focusing on the geysers, whatever it may be. Obviously, there's so many different things that you can focus on, but I feel like this itinerary gives you kind of a little bit of everything. You're able to see the most you possibly can, mixing in driving, wildlife, a couple of hikes here and there to some nice viewpoints, nothing too strenuous. But then you get a good overview for Yellowstone and what it feels like. So if you ever decide to come back, then you can know what's something that you missed out on or something you really enjoyed so you want to focus more on. But, overall, you get a good glimpse of Yellowstone National Park in 4 days. I hope you enjoy your trip.